Hello, welcome to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Bob Scarborough.
And we are the FAIRtax guys. And yes, I remembered my cube this time.
Hey, I like it, man. All dressed up and ready to go. That's the one. Is that the one that's just so big and complex that you can never get it figured out?
No, this is the 11 by 11 one, and it just takes a while to solve it. The same solution algorithm that solves all the other ones solves this one. It just takes longer because there's more pieces. The one I can't solve cheats. The colors change as you move it around in your hand. And I'll bring that for you to look at here one of these days.
Thank you very much.
Check that out. But I'll tell you, I am pumped every week. I enjoy coming here to the recording studio and trying to put together a FAIRtax Power Radio program that folks will find both entertaining and informative. But this one's got my adrenaline level up a little bit extra. Now, absolutely no disrespect to any of the other people that we've talked to that have signed the FAIRtax candidate pledge, but for the most part, everyone we've talked to has not had much name recognition. Now, they're probably fairly well known within their own, local districts and little areas. But today we've got somebody with a whole lot of national name recognition we're going to talk to. You may have heard of a fellow from Alabama. His name is Mo Brooks.
Righto. Definitely.
Well, we are pleased. We
haven't heard of him. You need to check him out.
Yeah, we got to give a shout out to Chuck Bailey. He arranged this interview for us with Mo Brooks, who has been a congressman from Alabama. He first took office in 2011, so he's been there for quite a while. And he had some rather interesting answers for some of the questions we had for him. So I'll tell you what, let's just get into this interview right quickly, and we can talk about it a bit on the other side. FAIRtax Power Radio is pleased to be continuing our series of interviews with candidates around the country who have signed the FAIRtax candidate pledge for the 2022 election cycle. And today we are honored to have Congressman Mo Brooks from Alabama with us. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for supporting the FAIRtax.
My pleasure. I would emphasize, by the way, that when you get candidates to sign a pledge when they're seeking your votes, they may not stick to it. That's why I'd like to emphasize that I've actually co-sponsored the FAIRtax bill in the House of Representatives a number of times over the last decade.
Oh, yeah, we'll be keeping an eye on everybody that has put their signature to the paper and reminding them that they need to do that. Let me, I start every candidate off with kind of the same question. Since not everybody is following every race all around the country, just kind of briefly give us your assessment of how things stand in your race as of today.
Well, I'm a candidate for the United States Senate in the state of Alabama. It's an open seat. Quite frankly, from our perspective, it looks really, really good. I'm the only candidate that's been endorsed by President Trump. I've also been endorsed by conservative stalwarts like Ted Cruz and Rand Paul. And the organizational side, entities like Eagle Forum, Freedom Works, Club for Growth, many others. And so the conservatives are rallying around our campaign. All the polling data that I have seen that's been independent of the campaigns has had me in first for quite some time, but it's a relatively close race. In Alabama, we have a runoff system and we have 6 candidates. So there's a pretty good chance there'll be a runoff. So you not only have to come in one of the top 2 positions May 24th, you then have to win the runoff about a month later in June.
All right. Well, let me take a little different tack with you, if I can, than I've taken with the other candidates I've spoken to. You've got some unique knowledge and experience and some insight into the way things are. Now, first, you are the first and so far only Senate candidate to sign the pledge for 2022. Now, as you know, we have H.R. 25 in the House. No companion bill in the Senate this time around. No one's been willing to sponsor it. Why do you think that is? And if you're elected, would you be willing to sponsor the FAIRtax in the Senate next Congress?
2 quick answers, easy to understand for both of them. The reason that you don't have a Senate sponsor is because the American people have not done a good enough job electing candidates to serve the United States Senate who support the FAIRtax and want the IRS out of our personal affairs. And yes, I'm more than happy to sponsor a companion bill in the United States Senate.
Excellent. That's good news. Now, the FAIRtax has been described by some as the greatest transfer of power from the government to the people in history. Do you concur with that?
Well, I don't know about that. By way of example, the Constitution is a pretty important document.
Oh, yeah.
You're comparing one form of taxation to the United States Constitution, which embodies the foundational principles that have created the United States of America and made us the greatest nation in world history. I'd be hard pressed to put any kind of political document above the importance of the United States Constitution. But it is extremely important, and it does shift power away from the federal government because it protects our privacy rights. The IRS can't go rifling through our personal affairs if there is no IRS there to collect income taxes. Now, we're still going to need some kind of tax collection structure for the FAIRtax, but it's minimal compared to the enormous size of the IRS. By way of example, just recently, the Socialist Democrats were pushing an effort to hire another 87,000 IRS workers to probe and pry into your private affairs. Wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have any of those folks doing any of that and they were doing more productive things in America?
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, I was actually going to get around to there, but you got me on that one. The unprecedented level of snooping that the Biden administration wants to do in people's bank accounts as a remedy for this $1 trillion a year tax evasion is just one of the things. They want to hire an army of new agents, double, triple the IRS's budget. Now, again, those are things that most people, even rank and file Democrats would oppose. Isn't the Republican Party missing a golden opportunity here to offer up the FAIRtax as an alternative to the Biden plan for fighting evasion?
Well, if your goal as an elected official is to serve the needs of the United States of America and the American people, then absolutely. Joe and Jane Citizen, in my judgment, greatly benefit from the passage of the FAIRtax. But unfortunately, the Democrats, they have their motivations, and you've got a lot of rhino Republicans that have their motivations, and a lot of it centers around money. Money is the mother's milk of politics, and there are plenty of special interest groups who love spending millions of dollars on campaigns for candidates who in turn will pay back those special interest groups by giving them special privileges. It might be tax deductions or tax credits or what have you in the IRS code. And so that's the battle that we have to fight, is to overcome the power, the money of those special interest groups that care more about their own wallets, more about their own profits than they do the United States of America.
Do you think we can convince Republican leadership that the FAIRtax is a better evasion fighting plan than the Biden plan?
Okay. I'm not for convincing all these people of that because that's a real uphill climb.
Okay.
I think if you want to pass the FAIRtax, then start electing people who already agree with you. Then you don't have to convince them. So that's the route to take. This is an election year. If you're adamantly for the FAIRtax, then make that the principal criteria by which you decide whether to support a candidate for the United States Congress or the United States Senate. And if you can't find one who will, then run yourself. Why not? Go for it.
There's a thought. Listen, let's look back a little bit. You were first elected to Congress in 2010, took office in January 2011. That was the 112th Congress. In that Congress, the FAIRtax had 70 co-sponsors, mostly Republican, but a smattering of Democrat support. Today, as we record this interview, they're just 27, less than half of that. Can you offer a theory on why we've seen such a dramatic drop in co-sponsors in the time you've been in Congress?
The only plausible explanation I have in my mind is that the proponents of the FAIRtax have not done a good enough job in the election process, emphasizing to candidates that you're either with us or you're against us. And if you're with us, we'll help you get elected. But it comes down to the American people doing their job in this republic. And their job, if you support the FAIRtax, is to elect people of like mind. And unfortunately, the FAIRtax proponents have not been aggressive enough, have not been influential enough in campaigns to get proponents of the FAIRtax elected to the House and the Senate.
Yeah, we've got our job cut out for us. It's been up there for 20 years. It's died in committee every year. There have been times when the Democrats were in control, times when the Republicans were in control, and it just doesn't seem to be going anywhere. So we're going to try to elect more FAIRtax people up there and give you some help.
Well, you've got a FAIRtax proponent in Congressman Mo Brooks, perhaps Senator Mo Brooks this time next year. But folks, that's up to you.
All right, question. You never hear about the FAIRtax in the media. Now, I know you have a lot of media contact, and I can understand why the Democrat-controlled media, which is a good chunk of it, wants to keep the FAIRtax under wraps. I never hear the FAIRtax mentioned on, say, talk radio or Newsmax, Fox Business, places you think would at least be open to discussing it. But any idea why the media has just such a deep freeze on the FAIRtax?
Well, if the proponents of the FAIRtax were to elevate the debate, if they were to start having influence on who wins and who loses elections, if they were to start having influence in the House and the Senate where there's a chance that the bill is actually going to come up for a committee vote or a floor vote, then all of a sudden you'd see the news media jumping all over it. But unfortunately, and again, this is a high hurdle to jump over, okay? But it has to be done with respect to any public policy position that anyone advocates. You have to elect people of like mind. That's the critical element in this entire puzzle. And so if you can get that piece in place, then the media will start paying more attention. But right now, the media does not perceive the fair tax as being viable in the United States Congress, so they're not paying attention to it.
Okay, all right. Let me shift gears here for a second and talk about Donald Trump. Now, from the day he rode down the escalator, you have been one of his staunchest allies. Now, with the Democrats trying to hang him with his own tax returns, you'd think he would be strongly in favor of a tax system that's totally anonymous, where there aren't any tax returns. And you think that a tax system that would make America the most business-friendly place on the planet to be would fit right in with his America First agenda. Can you give us any insight about what Donald Trump thinks about the fair tax? I mean, he has to be aware of it.
No, you'd really have to talk to Donald Trump or one of his spokesmen. President Trump and I have never had a conversation about the fair tax. Of course, we've been battling some major issues, as you may have noticed, border security being paramount, the battle between free enterprise and socialism being paramount, the battle between moral values and amoral values being paramount. Just go down the list. So the Democrats have been attacking us day after day, week after week, with these egregious policies that are going to undermine our republic. And so we, quite frankly, have been fighting battle after battle, just trying to protect and promote the foundational principles that have combined to make us the greatest nation in world history. The fair tax would be on the radar of any president, just as it would be on the radar of most anyone in the news media, if the proponents were to become aggressive enough and successful enough to make it an issue that is going to be debated in committees in the House or the Senate or the House or Senate floor. So we kind of got the chicken and the egg problem, which comes first. There's the argument that you have to get congressmen and senators to introduce it, and that comes first. And there's some truth to that. But you also first have to get those congressmen and senators elected who will do that. And so which comes first, the people who are there introducing the legislation, or the elections of people who will then, once in office, advocate the fair tax? And Congressman Mo Brooks, the fair tax proponents, they have that guardian, they have that help. But quite frankly, I'm a fairly lonely voice on Capitol Hill in favor of the fair tax. And as an aside, I'd be remiss if I did not say, look, if you want to help a fair tax proponent, please go to mobrooks.com, mobrooks.com. This is an opportunity to get into the United States Senate a fair tax proponent, as evidenced by not pledges, which most any candidates will give in order to get your vote, not necessarily keep those pledges, but they'll give them. With Mo Brooks, you've got someone who's actually been in the heat of the battle and has co-sponsored this kind of legislation, firmly planting that fair tax flag in the House of Representatives with the legislation that's been introduced.
All right. Well, Trump has always been kind of a big ideas guy, an out-of-the-box thinker. So hopefully we could at least get him to think about it and maybe come out in favor of the fair tax. Let me shift gears again and look back to your home state of Alabama. We've talked a lot here on FAIRtax Power Radio about the Alabama Economic Freedom Act, which would replace your state income tax with a state-level fair tax. Now, I know you're on the national level, but you're on the ground there in Alabama. Just how is that going, and do you think Alabama is going to get that done?
I have not heard of any movement in the legislature, but in fairness, I don't serve in the legislature. I'm a little bit hesitant about the Alabama legislature. Just as we have special interest groups that dominate what goes on in Washington, D.C., similarly, we have special interest groups that dominate what goes on in Capitol Hill and Montgomery, Alabama. So hopefully there will be enough conservatives elected during this 2022 election cycle, this being a legislative election year in Alabama, to make a difference. Time will tell whether we're going to change and be more aggressive in promoting the ideology of conservatives. Hopefully we will. But again, that's up to the people of the state of Alabama. I pray they'll be successful. I pray that they will be as active as is necessary. But if they aren't, I assure you, the moneyed interest and the liberals, they're fighting against us.
Well, I'm sure you're aware that Georgia is trying to do the same thing that Alabama is, replace its state income tax with the state level fair tax. And I saw the other day where Newt Gingrich came out in favor of getting rid of the Georgia state income tax, but then in the next breath says, and we need a flat tax at the federal level. What's it going to take to bring him and others like him around to the fair tax as a national issue?
It all comes down to what I've previously stated. The proponents of the fair tax, as any proponents of any major issue have to do, is make it paramount in elections, where they make a difference in who wins and who loses, where they can say, hey, we got the scalp of that incumbent congressman or incumbent senator who was opposing us. And when you show that scalp to the American people, when you show that to the media, all of a sudden they sit up and take notice. Most importantly, candidates running for public office sit up and take notice. So until the fair tax proponents have been successful in dethroning incumbent congressmen and senators, or legislators for that matter, and electing those who support the fair tax, it's going to be difficult to get this on the radar screen of all those people we need on the radar screen in order to start having an effect. The effect, of course, being the actual passage of the fair tax at the state or at the federal level.
All right. We're working as hard as we can to make that happen. Now, as you also know, that Mike Huckabee is a big fair tax guy. Just off the top of your head, is there any other big name you think we can bring into the fair tax tent?
Well, in the House of Representatives, it was a congressman by the name of Woodall from Georgia. He was the lead sponsor, but he retired.
Yes.
There are plenty of big names in politics. I'd hate to point the finger at one or the other because there are just so many. I'd admit some, but basically broad brush, hit them all. And again, I'm going to emphasize in Alabama, that Senate prospect is mobrooks.com. That's where you go if you want to help my campaign to support the fair tax, not only in the House where I am now, but also the United States Senate. That helps elevate the discussion.
All right. Well, certainly we'll keep an eye on that for sure. Now, I assume you'll be at least making an appearance sometime at CPAC here in Orlando in a couple of weeks.
I don't know if I'm going to be invited to CPAC in Orlando or not. I was at CPAC in Dallas-Fort Worth back in the fall. There's been some discussion about me going to CPAC, but the CPAC proponents have not gotten back to me. They've asked me to speak, and I've said yes. But there are some logistical arrangements that they have to present to me so that I can make a firm decision one way or the other, and I've yet to receive that information.
All right. Well, if you do make it, we'll be down there in our Fair Tax Power radio gear, and I'd love to meet you in person if you can come by and say hi to us.
My pleasure. And by the way, make out that check to Mo Brooks for Senate.
All righty. Well, I certainly appreciate you talking to us today. And again, appreciate you supporting the fair tax and your commitment to sponsor it. I won't say if, I'll say when you are elected to the Senate from the state of Alabama. Thank you so much for talking with us today.
My pleasure. And have I emphasized enough that I need your help to win?
Yeah, I think that's come through, and I think it's come through that what we as grassroots fair tax supporters need to do is start electing more people who are committed to the fair tax in more than just name only, folks that'll actually follow through and do it.
That's the key to success. Well, thank you for the opportunity. Good luck.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, there we go.
Nice.
I tell you what, it is nice to have someone with his name recognition on board with her. And I looked it up when he was first in Congress, his very first Congress back in 2011, which was the 112th Congress.
I know.
He signed on as a fair tax co-sponsor the very day that the bill was introduced. So he has been a fair tax co-sponsor literally from day one as a congressperson. So we certainly appreciate that. And of course, he's the first candidate for the U.S. Senate to sign the pledge. Hopefully there'll be more. But it was interesting. What really struck me, Bob, was that he gave me pretty much the same answer to several of the questions I asked him. Why do we have fewer co-sponsors now than then? Why is the media ignoring the fair tax? Why isn't the Republican Party, latching on to the fair tax as an alternative to the Biden plan for fighting evasion? And the answer to all of those questions was, you guys haven't made it a big enough issue for them to pay attention to. So
and the thing you have to do, and that translates to me is that we as the citizens of the great United States of America need to get on the telephone and call Congress and call our White House and call the senators and talk to them. And several weeks ago, many weeks ago now, I had a chance to talk to one of the candidates that we interviewed a while back, who echoed that same sentiment. The reality is that the phone rings all the time at your representative's office there in Washington. And it should be it could be us calling 2 or 3 times a week and having your friends and relatives and in-laws and outlaws calling and saying, hey, FAIRtax, we need to take another look. You all need to get behind this. And after, say, 5 or 6 or 10 calls, it's very possible that that your representative will begin to look at what is going on and saying, well, this FAIRtax thing, because
we've been saying all along, it is important for people to do that. Call your congressperson, call your senator, let them know, A, that you support the FAIRtax, and you're not going to be inclined to vote for somebody who doesn't support it.
Right. And that's what we're finding out with the candidates who are signing the pledge now, is they are seeking this out. And as we hear in interviews, especially with the folks that are what I would call citizen candidates, not somebody who's necessarily out to get into office to stay there, but is just so put out by what is going on in the Washington culture these days that they are going and they want to shake the place up, much as it was done back a couple of decades ago during the time of the changes that took place, I guess, in the early 90s, mid 90s.
Well, we couldn't have it from a higher authoritative source than someone like Mo Brooks, that it is going to take grassroots support at the grassroots level to move Congress. We've had several of the candidates we've talked to say pretty much the same thing. So call them is one thing. You happen to have some phone numbers handy, don't you?
I do. I've got them right here for Congress. This is the main switchboard for Congress. Of course, you should know your representative's name before calling, because they will just say switchboard or United States Congress switchboard, and it's 202. This is for Congress, 202, and the Senate, 202-224-3121, 224-3121, area code 202. And the White House switchboard is 202-456-1414, 456-1414. Both area codes are 202. And of course, you can go to your representative's website, which is readily available through your favorite search engine. Or you can also make a comment to the White House at whitehouse.gov/contact. So keep that in mind. And the more times, and obviously you don't want to overload it with the same person, but in your conversations with your friends and neighbors, you need to maybe give them these numbers and say, hey, just while you're driving to work or while you're sitting having your second cup of coffee, how about calling your congressman and letting them know that they need to be looking at the FAIRtax. And the more they hear it, the better it's going to be, the more aware they're going to be, and they're going to they'll send one of their staff members to say, they'll say, well, we got to find out about this FAIRtax. What's this all about? Okay, some of them have probably heard about it. Others may not have at all.
A couple other things come to mind too. You mentioned the whitehouse.gov/contact. There's another website that we haven't talked about in quite a while called PopVox, POPVOX, where you can go in and make comments on any piece of legislation before Congress. You need to give it your street address so it knows what district you live in. But any comments that you make on PopVox, POPVOX.com, also get to your congressman. I mean, just about every congressperson has at least one staffer who is monitoring that. But one other thing that comes to mind as well is if AFFT had the money, can you imagine what would happen if Americans for Fair Taxation had the budget to buy fair tax ads on, say, Sean Hannity's show or Tucker Carlson's show or even on MSNBC or CNN, any place like that? And if we could get the fair tax marketplace up and going, it is vital that we have a vibrant, and thriving fair tax marketplace. We can have the fair tax movement can have the resources it takes to get the word out. And once, as we've said all along here on Fair Tax Power Radio, once you understand it, you'll demand it. And once enough people understand it, if we can get the word out to enough people, then that solves the problem of it not being a big enough issue for the media and for the politicians to pay attention to.
That's right. And if you go to the Fair Tax Marketplace right now, fairtaxmarketplace.com, you can actually register and be a part of that. everybody who is associated with the FAIRtax, if you're a volunteer, if you're a representative in any of the states, you need to encourage your state members, the ones that have signed up or that you know of, and let them make it a personal invitation to go to FAIRtaxMarketplace.com and register. And once you're there, even if there's 4 products or a dozen products on there, you'll be there and be ready. And in the meantime, ideas that you may have, you may wake up like I do in the middle of the night and go, wow, we need to do this. And you have a piece of paper right beside your bed and you write it down and you take action on it the next day. That happens to me more times than I can count. But if there is someone that you know in your area that has a product or a service or a craft or anything that they do that could be available to a national market, that's somebody that should be a part of the FAIRtax. It doesn't cost them anything to sign up, but part of their sale of their item that they're selling comes back to the Americans for Fair Taxation. It makes it possible for some of the things that we've been talking about today, making people in Washington more aware of the FAIRtax. That's one of the ways to do it is through the FAIRtax Marketplace.
Yeah, and if you're a customer, if you're a consumer, you can go out there and leave them a suggestion. What kind of products or services would you personally like to see on the marketplace? And the marketplace team takes those things to vendors that can fulfill those requests. And when you walk up to somebody who's got a business and say, "Hey, I've got customers for you right here. If you'll sign up for us," then that works. And I still want to see the Wilkerson's Bakery out there.
Right. And I believe that once Valentine's Day is over, they keep looking for the time. And absolutely, that is something that will most definitely happen. I think the young folks that are in charge of the organization are tech savvy and understand the benefits. There, of course, website that they have to be able to ship products around the country and around the world is running phenomenally well right now. And any place that they can drop a line in the water, and this is true for any business. Maybe somebody who has an online service already. How many more opportunities could you get to be a part of FAIRtax Marketplace? It reminds me a lot of Amazon and how you can set up a little store online there. And then, of course, nonprofits that have an association through eBay as well, where you get a hit off of something that's purchased through the affiliation with those large online retailers.
Well, I can guarantee you, Mike Simmons has told me that the commission that a small business selling on Amazon has to pay to Amazon is a whole lot more than the commission that'll be charged on if you get a sale through the FAIRtax Marketplace. But real quick, let me go back and fill some folks in who may not be aware. During this past Christmas season, if you grow up in Winston-Salem, you know about Moravian sugar cake and the spice cookies that they have. They are just absolutely wonderful. And once again, if more people outside of Winston-Salem know about that, they'll buy it in bulk, because this is the bakery that you bought that stuff from and sent down to me, and I appreciate that a bunch. So.
Absolutely. If you check out a few episodes back, you'll see Bob Paxton eating the spice cookies from Wilkerson.
Oh, yes. They are long gone by now. And I tell you what, we're going to have to wrap up this edition of FAIRtax Power Radio. Again, thanks to Chuck Bailey for arranging the interview, and thanks to Mo Brooks for talking with us. But I say that's going to wrap it up. We're flat out of time again. So I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Bob Scarborough.
We are the FAIRtax guys. Reminding you again, as we always do, that the FAIRtax is the only truly fair tax. And once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
So what would you do for her?
Well, we've got several programs that will help her. We just need to find out how much she makes. But the good news is, the less she does, the more we can help.
Yeah.
If I may, with the FAIRtax, we wouldn't even tax her income. So the more she makes, the more she has.
But still, a consumption tax could eat up a lot of her income.
Which is why at the beginning of every month, we're actually going to give back all that she pays in taxes on basic necessities.
You're going to give her back her taxes?
Every month, on everything taxed on basic necessities. But we're also going to give it back to you and to every American citizen.
Why?
Well, we believe